Okay, nice to see you. Nice to see a former Wiley colleague of the past.
That's it.
And please.
So I'm Jason Markos. I lead the Content Enrichment Initiative at Wiley. And please you.
Yeah, I'm Sam Herbert. I'm the Client Services Director at 67 Bricks. Really excited that we're getting to talk about some of the work we've been doing with Wiley for the last few years. It's been interesting work and it's delivered some powerful capabilities. So before Jason starts, I'm going to leave him to do most of the talking. You're probably most interested in what he's got to say more than me. So I've got my chair.
So I usually apologise for speaking too fast, but given that it's 4:15 at the end of the day, I'm going to speak fast and not keep you here too late. But if you do have questions, just stop me as we go through. The first thing I want to do is just explain a little bit about why 67 Bricks are here with us as well, is that content enrichment as a capability is not something that we have a lot of time to do, but most of us as publishers are under a lot of pressure to publish faster and cheaper. And content enrichment is inherently trying to say almost do it slower and more expensive, which is inherently a problem. So we're all working against a lot of inertia that's going to stop us if we don't find a way around that. So having a consultancy as a partner really helps. It gives you dedicated bandwidth. A lot of us know a lot of this stuff, but we all have a day job, and we don't have time to do it. So dedicated bandwidth, objective perspectives, and industry understanding, as well as just technology understanding. So 67 Bricks and Sam have brought a lot of those things to us. So that's my commission part over. Send the check to me afterwards. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today is how we've approached trying to put content enrichment as a capability in place at Wiley and how far we are along that process. And these are the four kind of main steps: defining a strategy, putting in some kind of prototype architecture in place to validate it, start to implement those things in production, and as part of that process is putting that into production, put in place an R&D capability as well as production capability roadmap and development. And that this last part, if I push here, is iterative and cyclical, and because the production is not a big bang, and we'll come into that in a bit more detail in a moment, but this R&D will help inform that, and we'll keep driving forward production capability. How's my pace? Can you understand me?
Yeah.
Why not? No one's falling asleep yet? Cool. Okay, so defining the enrichment strategy. This is the key thing for us, because enrichment as a term seems fairly simple, but we think it's quite fundamental. The first thing we wanted to do was a lot of analysis around defining a vision statement, because the background for us was lots of people coming to us, individual publishers are saying, we want a taxonomy, or we've seen this taxonomy navigation on the website, or we've seen these related article links, and we want those. And we realized that they were saying those things, what they really want is some kind of content enrichment capability, and that doing it across the board was going to be far more powerful. So we came up with this idea of this vision statement about Wiley being this digital-first information provider with a core competency of enriching content to make it more valuable. So lots of things in here. Digital-first information provider, not publisher. Yeah, we're an enabler of providing information in a digital form, of where things like paper or PDF might be an output of that, but that's not the primary goal. The core competency part is the other thing. My goal is to make myself redundant at Wiley. Enrichment today is a bit of a black art, and some people don't understand it, some people get it. But today, most of us are already using XML, and it's not a black art. 10 years ago, XML was this scary stuff, and why do we need it, and how do we do it? We're still not all the way there, but it's nowhere near as black art, and we just kind of accept it. And enrichment should become part of that. It needs to become a core competency, because what is the value we provide as a publisher if we can't do the last bit, which is make that content more valuable? Simply getting the paper out faster isn't really adding more value. And this is why we think this is so fundamental to what we are doing as an organization. We have to make that happen. So that all sounds very grandiose and cool, but then why? Well, so we defined some business objectives that take us down to the next level of granularity. Increased relevance, discoverability, and usage. So if our content is well described, if it's been enriched, we can make it more relevant, we can increase the chance that someone will find it in the first place, and ultimately lead to usage. And in the STM arena, usage means citations, citations means impact factor, which means money. I know as publishers we're not meant to be so crass as to talk about money, but that's the reality. And so, the better our content is described, the better that will happen. Credibility. Some people talk about the arms race. The other publishers are doing this, so we must do this too. And I think enrichment is one of those things. And that's partly okay. But the other part of credibility as well is for the author. The author spent all this time writing this article. And they already can do pretty good desktop publishing in Word and generate PDFs themselves. If we don't start doing more things for the author, then they're just going to publish it themselves. And in particularly in the world of open access, if we don't give value for that $3,000 or $5,000 or something, then they're just going to go to any other journal. So we as an organization, we can provide capabilities to those authors that will then mean they want to have their content published in a Wiley journal. It's kind of like we could become the best estate agent in the country, but if no homeowner wants to have their house sold by us, what good are we? So we have to find a way to bring credibility and value to our authors. And these first two objectives are what we call, these are sound strategies in terms of what we call transitional business strategies. By transitional, we mean by putting our PDFs online, we haven't changed the business model. We're essentially still selling a subscription to a journal that you're then accessing as PDFs online. It's essentially the same business model, just in a different media. But what we've got to do is move forward to what we call transformational business opportunities, where we can pursue new models. And this is the point I think you were raising earlier. We can do these first two things better if our content's enriched, but our real opportunity is in the last part. How can we start making that content useful outside simply, here's the PDF, you read it and you work out the answer? 9 times out of 10, someone doesn't just want to read the content for the sake of reading the content. They've got a question they're trying to answer. There's a task they're trying to do. They could be a chemist working at BASF who's been tasked with finding a more effective way to synthesize a compound. Now, they can do that by reading all the content, but it'll take them forever. But if we give them a tool that says, here are the 12 different ways to synthesize that compound in reaction pathways, but that's all that was in the content, but if we've made it available in that form, then we've helped that person. And that's a new value proposition. They're not going to want to subscribe to the content, they're paying for the answer. Does that make sense? Cool. Okay. So this is then how we sort of turned those kind of grand ideas into something useful. So top marks for anybody at the back who can read any of the blue text or the orange text.
We can read it from here, which is unusual.
Okay, very good.
I've never seen one of these things. I can read anything.
It could be anything. So trust me, it's really cool and important stuff. The key thing here is that the green circles are the objectives we just talked about. And the point about the slide is you can talk about these big picture objectives, but how do you go from those business objectives to some kind of practical implementation strategy? Because we can sit in a room and say, yeah, we want to increase discoverability, we want better credibility, we want to support new revenue streams. So the point here was the blue are ways that you might then do that, and then the orange are the capabilities that you would put in place to support that. Have I got those right around? Yep. So the point being is, and then multiple blues that support green is then if a blue supports all 3 green items, then that's a sound direction. And if an orange item supports multiple of those blues, then that's a particularly sound strategy. So what this did was gave us some way to say, well, to prioritize and identify the things that would be useful and effective in realizing those goals. So from that, we then kind of came up with this very conceptual architecture. If there's any techies in the room, emphasis on the conceptual. This is not a technical architecture. This is super high-level conceptual architecture. A couple of the key parts about this that are interesting, I think. The first is, so this is the bit that I'm working with Sam and our team are tasked with building. So it's this content enrichment orchestration layer, which has an enrichment authoring component, which is, i.e., how would someone do the enrichment manually, potentially? Text mining component, which text mining, by text mining I mean software that can read the content automatically for you and work out some of those answers for you. And then the knowledge store is where we want to put all that information. So by knowledge store, we mean holding the taxonomies, ontologies, that kind of stuff, as well as the actual classification of the content. So we say we've got a list of drugs, SNOMED, CT drug extension, that's the taxonomy. And then the fact that this article talks about insulin is then what's also stored in the knowledge store. And then the final part is this thing here, KM development, which we'll come on to in a minute in a bit more detail, but KM is what we use the term knowledge model. I think Graham talked about this yesterday. Knowledge model is a term that we've adopted because basically we got into too many arguments about taxonomies versus ontologies versus vocabularies. And technically, there is an importance to those details, but in business strategy and implementation, it doesn't really matter. What you'll do is, if you're working in genes and proteins, then you'll adopt the gene ontology. If you're working with drugs, you'll adopt the mesh taxonomy. Does it really matter? We just have to support the range of those things. So we call it knowledge models to then take a lot of the heat, mostly pointless argument out of the discussion. So that's the kind of what we've got to build, but the real point is it's across the board. It's across the content workflow. It's not where you do your content acquisition, you do your content production development, and then post that, enrich it. The point is there are different points in the workflow where you might want to do this enrichment. And depending on, in some domains, in chemistry, any chemistry publishers here? Yeah, some of them are super good at CDX files, SD files, Inchi codes, and so you can ask them to do that stuff, and they'll put it in, and you can get a lot of that enrichment from the author up front. In other areas, you can't get a damn thing out of them. They're just, and so you've got to do more work yourself. And the point is that varies based on domain and the technology and tools. So things like Themis already has mesh vocabularies built in. So you can do a lot of stuff automatically. Other areas, business classification, it's pretty hard. So the point is that we need a holistic way to integrate into that picture. And then the other part as well is it's about putting it into the content. We're not trying to put it into the product channel. We're trying to put it into the content system so we can support a range of content channels. So thinking about what we said in the previous slide, we're trying to support new revenue propositions. We don't know what those delivery channels are. So it's not about building it for one product channel today. It's about knowing that we should support the product channels we have today, but being able to adapt to the new product channels we'll build in the future. Okay? Cool. Am I speaking too fast yet? No? Okay. You will be tested at the end.
Can I ask you why the last slide you had no lines, no arrows against some of the things? Is it significant that text mining is left sitting on its own?
No, because the content enrichment frame, so this part here, so we call this our orchestration layer.
Okay.
And so that's like the bit that does all the handshakes between the different systems.
Okay.
And so you can imagine, rather than make it too busy, all those things are magically integrated into that bit. Cool. Okay, good question, thanks. So this framework slide here tries to also say, so the last slide talks a lot about the technology, and what we found is a couple of things. A, that technology is a whole bunch of work. It's not a big bang. You're not just going to go out and buy a piece of software, deploy it, and be done. The other part is, to make it effective, it's much more about a framework, and we think that it's about having all these four things in place. This is our four-legged stool, if you will. So in order for enrichment to really work effectively, we have to change the people and the processes and the technologies and have knowledge models in place for this to work. We can't just go buy technology or change one thing on its own. So for example, people. How many of you have any taxonomies managed in your organization? Anybody? Yeah, a couple? And how many of you have people who are dedicated to do that? 9 times out of 10, it's someone's spare time job. Yeah, we need to have people who can do this stuff. That's just one part of people. The other part of people is the people to apply the classification to the content. So as Venki talked about, there's the people who do the hands-on checking of that content. And is the GPSL guy still here?
No, he had to go to the airport.
He's gone to the airport, okay. So they talk about doing the QA check of the pagination. Well, maybe we'd be doing even more value if we were doing enrichment of the content. I don't know about you guys, but we at Wiley have so many PhDs who've come to work for us saying, I'm going to go work for a scientific publisher because I'm a PhD. And then we make them do administration work, rather than let them use their knowledge, their science knowledge, and actually get them to impart that onto the content and add that value. So people is one example that needs to change. Processes, this is back to the other point, somewhere integrated into the workflow we can do this enrichment. And there'll be different parts of the workflow that are appropriate for different domains and different content. Technologies, there's a whole range of these technologies. So we've adopted the Themis suite of technology for big chunks of it, but there are other technologies for different text mining. The knowledge store, we call that, which is a triple graph database. Different technology need to be implemented for different parts of it. The knowledge models, we need to both, A, adopt existing standards, and B, where those standards don't exist, implement knowledge models for those domains. So mesh, I don't know if anyone works a lot with mesh today as a taxonomy. Some would say that intellectually it's not very good, but it's hugely adopted. And so you can't not work with it. If you work in medicine, you've got to work with mesh, and that's just how it is. In other areas, business, there aren't ones out there that already exist. In business, there are not robust ones, so we have to learn to build those as well. And the point is that we need all four of those things to develop. So when I talk about making myself redundant, it's when we have all those four things in place, that we have people who can do this stuff, that we have a bunch of processes in place, and a bunch of technologies, and a range of knowledge models. I don't imagine it'll be done. We'll continue to refine it and implement it, but it's when those things are essentially in place and we have a critical mass of capability, that's what I'm talking about. And so the green boxes talk about having multiple projects that will incrementally realize those capabilities. Okay, cool. I think I'm taking too long, aren't I? Prototype enrichment architecture. Is this one hand up to you? Yep, cool.
Thanks. So having worked together on the strategy, the next piece was to actually build out a prototype enrichment architecture. The purposes of that were to, first of all, test the technology. Did it work and did it communicate with each other? Did the different pieces communicate with each other? But the more important bit was to demonstrate there was actually some business benefit from this. So what we did was we connected an XML content store with, and we built an orchestration layer that then allowed that to communicate with enrichment tools, in this case, Temis Luxid. We took 60,000 Wiley articles, put it into the architecture, and then enriched it with keywords. What we define as a keyword is something that's potentially of interest to the user of the content. And the processes we use to identify those were out-of-the-box Temis pieces, but they are grammatical and statistical analysis. So the grammatical analysis looks at the sentence structure and identifies the position of the terms within the sentence structure and gives it some weighting based on that. And it also does statistical analysis compared to a corpus, where the corpus was the 60,000 articles in this case. And from that, we get a set of keywords for each article. So there's 60,000 articles with keywords. And we can use that to build what we call a basic fingerprint for each individual article. And then we defined a relatively simple, in this case, algorithm to relate or determine relatedness between articles. And then we built what you're seeing here, which is a relatively simple interface just to demonstrate that content feature, which is the related articles. That was tested by subject matter experts and confirmed to be significantly better than the alternative approaches to relatedness. And that's what allowed us to get senior stakeholder approval to move on to the production implementation.
Yeah, we'll cover some more on this later as well. This is a really powerful part of the process because in terms of getting the buy-in, intellectually we can all kind of argue how right it is to do enrichment and how obviously it's better if our content's better described. But if I can't see what that means as a benefit to a user or to a consumer of the content, it's just a kind of intellectual high horse that we can sit on. It's like, wow, our content's much smarter. But if there's no value to it, this is an example of demonstrating that value and helping people see this is why it's a benefit. And the interesting thing is that as an application, these are the keywords we showed just because it was a prototype. But in reality, all you'd see is much, much better related articles. So the user would never think, oh, this is an enriched piece of content. But they're just getting the benefit from that in an integrated user experience point of view. Cue Sam and good user experience. She's not paying attention. Anyway, okay. So production implementation. I was trying to call that user experience, Sam. No? Okay. So, is it Andrea? Sorry, Andrea. I thought it was Sam. Anyway, apologies. So production implementation. There's a couple of things here. So, as we said in the previous slide, it was about the fact that there's incremental capability we want to realize here. So we've done a couple of key things that are in place now. So we now have a full knowledge store in place that's integrated to our production workflow. Every single article that we publish goes through a basic enrichment process now to generate a semantic fingerprint for that. And that all resides in our knowledge store. That's one key part of production implementation. And then the other part is our chemistry workflow. So chemistry for us is a particularly big part of Wiley's business. Angevent Chemie is a big journal for us. And we have several other journals in that space. And the idea here was, if we could better capture the chemical structure in the content, we could then make those chemicals available as kind of first-class objects in the article. Because right now those chemicals are often drawn in images. I think someone made the image comment earlier about, I think it was this gentleman here, about we say figures in the article, but the article is often made up of 6 components. The image is made of 6 components, and in fact those figures and those chemical structures are what really matter. So what we do now is have a workflow that allows us to identify those components and turn them into real chemical structure underneath, so that when you get to the article, you can then actually interact at the compound level for the article, rather than I've got to read it all. I can now find that compound, I can search on it, I can find other content that uses that as well, but that meant a complete change to our content workflow. So I think this is where we come to CQA now.
Yeah. Okay. So, as Jason said, we were looking at specifically the chemistry workflow. What you're seeing here is the QA user interface for that enrichment component. Behind the scenes, though, there's an orchestration component that integrates the production workflow with the chemistry enrichment tool. The kind of things the user can do here is obviously accept, reject individual terms. They can actually look at the individual chemical structures and suggest and actually redraw them within the browser. All that information, if it's accepted, that's great, and if it's all correct, that's great. If there's anything that's rejected, then that gets fed back to the enrichment tooling, which then can improve the enrichment tooling over time, and then the number of errors reduce over time as well. I think that's probably all I need to go here. Yeah.
So I think a key point about this is that we updated how we worked with our authors for this. We changed our working practice with our vendors for this. We have subject matter experts who then review this as a process as well. And the underlying content is then very different too, in that these chemical structures, here it looks like a word, but we actually are storing full SDX and INCHI structures for those chemical compounds. So this is now just a label, and we can now search on actual organic chemical structures, for example, because you have the underlying content markup going on. So this was a fundamental change to our workflow. And then out of it, what the user sees as an example, and you can see this online today on online library on 7 of our journals today, you can actually do things like, as you open the article, you get this compound browser, and you can look at the compound structure. You can highlight everywhere it's referenced. Are any chemical publishers here? Chemistry has this remarkable thing of, if there's a figure with 6 compounds in it, then one of the compounds is labeled number 1. Every time you see the number 1 bold, you're meant to know it's that chemical compound. Now, in PDF terms, there's nothing to tell you that that 1 means that compound. So our markup structure now means that we now mark up that 1, and we know that that 1 really means that chemical structure now. So it's still formatted as a 1, but behind the scenes, under the content, we know what it really is. It's saying this chemical structure, and you can then do these things. So when you highlight all instances, it will highlight that bold number 1 for you now, where that number 1 is the chemical compound, not just an arbitrary number 1. Okay? So take a look at a few of our journals. Asia, I think, is one of the ones if you want to go look it up on the library. You can check it out. There is some open access content there. So we're pretty proud of that. So going forward, this is then how we need to then, we've defined our strategy and vision. We've done some prototyping. We've got some first production implementations in place. How do we drive forward from here then? So back to what I said earlier, this enrichment isn't just for the sake of doing it. We're doing it to enable our business. So we have come up with this kind of sort of mechanism, I guess you want a better term, of working on with our product managers and our business managers of what are the products that they care about and what are the product features they need that will be useful to us for us to be competitive as an organization, and how do we need to build capabilities and components that will enable those things. And it's a bidirectional, symbiotic relationship where we work with our marketeers and our sales guys and our product managers who they say where their product's going and the product features they care about. And out of that, we prioritize our capabilities and components. And by contrast, we also say, hey, we've built this capability. Can you make that into a product feature? So it's very much a bidirectional conversation. And so examples of things like capabilities and components. So a component would be the knowledge store, which holds all this enrichment, or a text mining engine. A capability would be, say, chemistry term extraction, or gene protein pathways extraction, or related article capabilities. And the product features then become dynamic publishing, or custom publishing services, so people can build their own collections, for example. That could be a product feature, and the product might be Wiley Online Library. So we found this to be really, really key, because it's really easy to start building stuff that technically makes sense, but if no one's got a use for it, you're going to spend a lot of money, and there's a risk is, no matter how cool it is, if no one's using it, then you've really spent the money in the wrong place. And even though, like I said, this does make sense, the reality is we are all under a lot more pressure. The journal business isn't what it was 5 years ago or 10 years ago, so we have to make sure that we're focusing on the stuff that's going to give us the maximum benefit. Otherwise, we just resort back to cheaper, faster, and this won't get done. So I highly recommend thinking like this. Get engaged with the business owners, the people who are driving those products, and think about what are the things that you could do that will actually turn into real value and real benefit. And sometimes it will be really, really frustrating as a conversation, because you're like, why aren't we doing this? This makes sense. But if they can't come up with a product feature, or they're not going to use it, it doesn't really make sense. So that's a key part. Next. So here I want to show an example of an R&D idea that also then shows where our capability is going and why the enrichment stuff really works in my mind. This is an R&D application. So we have a full R&D area now with about 25 apps, I think, 25 applications on there that illustrate what one might be able to do if you had a good enrichment infrastructure in place. And it allows us to test what might be an interesting idea. It helps our product development guys to think about what they might do with it, and it allows us to test enrichment ideas. And the example here was, so if we think about what that knowledge store is this graph database that holds lots of objects. So it holds the articles, and it holds the classification of those articles. Well, so imagine if we know who the author is of the article, and we know who the author worked for when they wrote the article. So Jason Markos wrote the article when he was studying at MIT, when he's writing the article on how cool content enrichment is. So now I've got a paper that's about content enrichment. I can infer from the paper that MIT is doing work on content enrichment. So now if I can collate that for many articles, many authors, I can start now to build a pretty interesting resource of which institutions are working in which field. And that becomes a tool that could be quite interesting. So for example, if you happen to be a spectroscopy salesperson, well, now I can go do some research and find out which universities, which institutions are doing the most work in spectroscopy now. And then I can go sell them a spectroscopy kit. So we, Wiley, have now got an information product that we could then make as a sales tool. Now, the point is, it's all enabled by the content, but I don't care about the content to read it. I care that good content's been used to make this work. And so when I talk about the transformational product I talked about earlier, this is an example of a transformational product concept, because the user is getting something that helps them, fundamentally enabled by our content, but they're not actually reading the content. We might show them the 12 articles, and if they care, they can go look at the articles, but the point is it's empowered by the content. And this is just one example. Another example could be funders. Yeah, we often have the funders in the papers. So if we know who's funding which field, then we could help you as a researcher go find funders to give you an next grant, for example. So these are transformational value opportunities that we see as an example for what you might do. And then, so we use our R&D environment to test these kind of ideas. So that's one. And then research.
I've got another one.
Then we move on to questions.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, this was just another of the R&D applications that we built. Here we were looking at reference book and see how we could enrich reference book content. What we did was we analysed the content. We took a book, Rook's Dermatology in this case, and we analysed the structure of the content, and we enriched it with medical references, medical entities, and then we developed a user interface that would try to give the user a new user experience for accessing that content. Now, what that looked like was a page where they could read through content about eczema, see the treatments that are relevant to eczema, see the drugs that are relevant to eczema in a nice user interface. I'm not showing you that piece because this is actually the bit they got most excited about, which was kind of an afterthought. But because we've got really granular structure of the content, and because we know what each granular structured piece of the content is about, the suggested search terms was a thing that the subject matter experts got so excited about. If they're in a clinical environment, they're sitting in front of their patient, and they're able to very quickly jump to epidemiology of eczematosis, dermatosis. That's really exciting for them, rather than having to look through 50 pages of content about eczema. which was a real interesting realization, and something that wouldn't have happened if we weren't able to just, there was some opportunity just to play with these things and see what was possible.
And the last thing just to add to this as well is that the interesting thing about this application was that it was about integrating the enrichment to the content as well. So this, as an application, was fundamentally enabled by having good XML as well. So it's not just enrichment bolted onto PDFs. A good XML strategy, a good content strategy works very much hand in hand with this. So, lastly, do lots of stuff. The next steps, keep focused on the maximizing the ROI. You built something, how are you going to maximize ROI? But depth and breadth and quality enrichment, it's incremental. You're not going to do all the enrichment all in one day in all the domains. So increase that depth, increase that coverage, and then think about how you're going to facilitate these new products. Think about the internal processes, and then and out of that, keep driving new enrichment capabilities. That's it. I obviously didn't talk fast enough. Okay, thank you.
We've got a few minutes for questions, and oh yes, Richard. I'm getting tired. Jo's over there, she's hiding in the back.
Thank you for a fascinating presentation. A lot of the benefits you point to relate to discoverability, related articles, improved discoverability. Typically, those value-add components are done at the ANI, at the aggregated level, because someone who's searching doesn't just want discoverability on one publisher or related articles on one publisher. So does that mean that you're getting more into the ANI space? Is that really what's behind this?
No, it means both, because the way that we give our content to PubMed, for example.
Do you want to ask a question?
Sorry, I was so trapped behind here. So when you think about, Google is the ultimate ANI, in effect, right? So if we can give the content to those services in a better structured form, then the chances are, or not chances, our content will be more discoverable in that service. So even without being an ANI ourselves, if we go to PubMed and say, well, actually, rather than you, PubMed, do the limited enrichment you do, we'll give you the structure up front, and out of that, Wiley content, well, that service benefits because then content's more accurate in terms of the search results, and Wiley benefits because our content's more discoverable within that service. Does that make sense?
Not entirely, but...
Well, so that search service relies on how well the content's structured. Yeah,
well, I don't know what Anthony has in mind, but I mean, my observation is that someone like PubMed used to do all the indexing for you for free. They do all the mesh mapping for you for free. And now you've taken on that cost, but you're improving their services, but not capturing the value. Well, other than somewhat more discoverability, I guess, is your point.
Somewhat more discoverability, and that isn't the only benefit. So we see it as aligned complementary strategies. So we're not going to replace the ANI. We're not going to replace PubMed or Google Scholar. So anything we can do to increase that, but at the same time, equip us to pursue the transformational, then becomes an aligned strategy in that thinking. So that's how we see it in that respect.
I mean, I'd be interested to hear if you've got anywhere with PubMed, but my experience of PubMed is that they're very controlling, and they wouldn't like to have somebody doing something which they're doing because it'll be slightly different, and they would just throw your stuff away.
That's a possibility?
They're like that, you see. No, they are. I mean, David Lippman's whole aim is to replace publishers.
Well, we have to have a chat with David and sort him out.
Okay. Any more questions? Oh, yes, good.
Hi, Caroline Burley from the Royal Society of Chemistry. Thanks, it's a really interesting talk, and I think particularly the work you're doing with the chemical structure enhancement is really nice.
Because you've done a lot of work in this area too.
We do some of that as well, yeah. I just wondered if you could expand a little bit on how you've managed to embed that into your production workflows. Is it part of the traditional workflow, or is it kind of carried out in parallel to that?
Yeah, it's integrated into the workflow. We found that that's what we had to do. So we worked very hard with our vendor to make it work as part of an integrated part of the process. And we do some pre-processing with software, some work with the vendor, and some work with an SME. So the tool that we saw there, we call the CQA tool, the chemistry QA tool, is a tool that then the vendor initiates as a part of that process. So it's very much integrated into that, and then so we take journals and they adopt that as their content workflow rather than it be a separate parallel one.
You say it takes longer. How much longer?
About 24 hours.
You understand that, can't you? Yeah.
Yeah, I think. I mean, it's interesting. Some people are still, no, that's too long. I think they're missing an opportunity there, but.
I was hoping to get David Martinson to say something, but he seems to be writing a paper at the moment. So he obviously is busy. You must say something. You're the big ACS man. Come on.
Okay. I mean, it's very interesting work. And I guess I would kind of echo Richard's comment a little bit, that the aggregators are out there doing the same thing. The end user really wants something broader than an individual publisher. And I guess because a number of us have implemented these interactive tools and linking, specifically chemistry, specifically data, do you see a lot of uptake on these? Or do you still see people just getting the PDF?
Yeah, so I think there is still a lot of inertia around, I just want the PDF and I'm just going to read it. Getting people to start thinking these as tools is an interesting change in culture. And I think we're seeing quite an interesting dynamic in the user experience work we're doing between those that are in college today studying and those that have been researching for 25 years and the way that they work. And so we are having to be a bit bold in thinking about where the future might be, because I think the PDF thing is still huge and still a big part of what we have in online library. But by the same token, you go talk to guys in labs today who are studying at college who don't even have pen and paper. They're using ELNs, electronic notebooks, and they don't even want paper anymore. And the idea of a PDF just seems arcane to them. So we are finding this quite interesting tipping point, we predict, of that people are going to change the way they want to work, and we want to be in the best position to kind of be ready for that.
Interesting. When Chapman and Hall in the early 1990s, we were indexing the structures in the and making them searchable on the CD-ROM technology. This is of the Dictionary of Organic Compounds, which we owned. I don't know what's happened to that. You know, but we enjoyed this structured stuff. It was all very exciting.
So I have a question for the room. How many publishers here are sort of seriously embarking on an enrichment strategy? What would you say? Yeah, not many?
Enrichment strategy.
An enrichment strategy, maybe less or more than this, but so there's a few. Yeah? Okay.
Few? Yeah, well,
I'm just checking we're not crazy.
There are people here, surely. There are people that are doing it anyhow, we know that. So. Any more questions? I see on the timesheet which Tasha has given me that she's cut into your space and said she's going to wrap up, but she's changed her mind. She's going to wrap up very, very little. So, but we better get her to wrap up, I think. Oh yes, another question. Go.
Hi, I'm Kaveh from River Valley. Thank you for that interesting talk. You mentioned PDFs. I gave a little 5-minute talk here that PDFs should be and can be far more interactive than they are now. Yeah. And all of for example, if you have the interactivity that you have, that for example your number one is actually a chemical formula, you can automatically build that as layers into PDF.
Absolutely.
And keep that too. And it's really underused. The using JavaScript plus layers in PDF.
Yeah, hugely. I think that I feel. My background is in publishing, so maybe I'm a little bit naive in my thinking here, but I feel like our PDF is still us not letting go of the page, and that really we should just see the PDF as what it's meant to be, a portable document format. And the amount of online-only journals we have who still want absolute perfect pagination, when if we could start letting go of some of that and start making PDFs interactive tools or resources that could be built on the fly, but if we could just let go of some of the minutiae of detail, we could build much more powerful PDFs, and they could have a much more effective role. Whereas right now, they're essentially, and I'm oversimplifying, this super static representation of the printed page, when there could be something so much more powerful. So 100% agree, and we just see PDF should just become another output, just like EPUB, just like HTML, those kinds of things. So yeah, 100% agree.
And this was expected from the very beginning. When Acrobat Adobe Acrobat was set up, they actually anticipated this. There was a thing called the golden plug they were going to do. Goodness knows what happened in the end, but it's taken time. But it was something which was originally part of the PDF plan. I think we ought to stop now and thank you, because Tasha would like to say a few words, and we don't want to end later than 5. That would be very naughty. So,
okay, thank you.
Thank you.